One accidental call to a dangerous mafia boss changed everything. Betrayed, terrified, and carrying a secret no one knows, Amara doesn't even know who the father of her child is. Now, survival, desire, and deadly secrets collide in a game where one wrong move could destroy her forever. Hi everyone, I'm Selena James, and before we dive into today's thrilling story, I just want to say a huge thank you for all the love and support you've shown. Please continue to support me, just like you've supported my husband, Mr. James. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Alcott Stories. I'd be truly grateful, and I can't wait to share more amazing stories with you. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and city lights, the kind that made everything feel sharper, more alive. Amara Johnson stood by her apartment window, her fingers brushing against the cold glass, the reflection of the streetlights dancing across her eyes. She remembered the first time she met Liam Carter, the way he had smiled, that easy charm that made her heart lurch unexpectedly. Everything about him had seemed perfect, intoxicating, almost unreal. He had made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. Their romance had been a whirlwind, a storm of passion and late-night laughter that swept through every corner of her life. Amara's friends had whispered warnings, but she had dismissed them. They didn't see what she saw. Liam's sparkling hazel eyes that seemed to look straight into her soul, the way he could make even mundane moments feel magical. Every touch, every stolen kiss, had been electric. She had fallen harder than she had ever fallen before, trusting him with her heart completely, without hesitation. For weeks it had been bliss. Coffee in the early morning, walks through the park as the wind tousled their hair, late-night drives with the radio playing softly in the background. Amara had felt invincible. She had allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of love that existed in stories, the kind that could survive everything. But love, she would soon learn, could be a cruel trickster, a double-edged sword. It started subtly, small shifts that she ignored at first. Liam's attention seemed to drift, his eyes occasionally flicking toward his phone with an intensity that made her stomach twist. His laughter no longer lingered in her ears the way it used to, and his once warm touch became fleeting, almost mechanical. Amara had tried to believe it was stress or exhaustion from work, but deep down, a knot of unease had begun to tighten in her chest. Then came the night that changed everything. They had checked into a hotel, a neutral place away from the world, promising to spend the night together, a private escape from their crowded lives. Amara remembered the softness of his hands, the way he whispered her name as if it were sacred. For a moment, she believed she had found her forever. But the next morning, the warmth was gone. The tenderness had evaporated, replaced by cold distance. Liam's eyes, once filled with fire, were now indifferent, almost cruel. "We need to talk," he had said, his voice void of any real emotion. Amara had felt a chill creep through her veins. "About what?" she had asked, clutching the sheets around her like a fragile shield. He had sighed, a sound that seemed heavy with boredom and contempt. "About us. I can't do this anymore. It's over." Her heart had shattered in slow motion. The disbelief had been suffocating. "What do you mean, over?" she had whispered, her voice trembling as tears pricked her eyes. I thought we were—" He cut her off, not with anger, but with an unyielding detachment that hurt more than any shout could. "It was never real for me, Amara. I got what I wanted, and now it's done." Amara had clutched at him, her mind screaming for him to stay, but he had already pulled away, retreating like a shadow slipping through her fingers. The finality in his tone was terrifying, a cold, calculated cruelty that left no room for argument. She had spent the rest of the day staring at her reflection, trying to make sense of the emptiness that had replaced her happiness. The world seemed sharper, colder, and every sound felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Days passed, but the betrayal lingered, heavy in the air around her. Then the whispers of something darker reached her ears. A friend had called, hesitant, almost afraid, mentioning that Liam had been messing with his phone while they were together. Amara's stomach churned with dread as she pieced it together. Could it be true? Had he done something unthinkable? The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Hidden videos, private moments, intimate encounters, recorded without her consent. The thought made her skin crawl, and yet, a part of her could not look away from the horror of it. Every moment she had shared with him, every laugh and every touch, had been exploited, twisted into a weapon she had never agreed to wield. Anger burned in her chest, mingled with shame and disbelief. How could someone she loved so deeply betray her so completely? She remembered the nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, her hands trembling. How many times had he smiled while secretly recording her? How many times had he whispered false promises as a mask for his selfishness? The realization was suffocating. It wasn't just the heartbreak. This was violation, a theft of her dignity. Amara's thoughts turned to her mother, Mrs. Eleanor Johnson, fragile and ill, who had always been her anchor. She couldn't imagine letting this man hurt them further. Her mind raced, plotting what she could do, how she could reclaim some sense of control in a situation that felt overwhelmingly hopeless. Fear, anger, and determination collided inside her. She had always believed in fairness, in people doing the right thing, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. And Liam? He didn't even seem to regret it. He hadn't apologized, hadn't hesitated to weaponize her trust and her love. He had treated her like a game, a challenge to be won and discarded. The very thought of him smiling while she suffered made her blood boil. Amara clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. She refused to be broken, refused to allow him to win in this twisted game of deceit. Her nights became sleepless, haunted by memories of his touch and the knowledge of his betrayal. She replayed conversations in her head, searching for signs she might have missed. Signs that could have warned her, but the truth was stark. She had loved blindly, fully, and in return, she had received cruelty and violation. The city outside her window blurred as tears streamed down her face. The betrayal was complete, a chasm that separated her from the person she thought she knew. Every shared moment, every whispered endearment, felt tainted by the knowledge of what he had done. She felt a mixture of grief and rage that she could hardly contain. How could someone so charming be so merciless? Yet beneath the layers of hurt and humiliation, a small ember of resolve began to burn. Amara was not just a victim. She was a woman scorned, someone who could no longer allow herself to be manipulated, to be used, or to be silenced. She would find a way to reclaim her power, even if it meant stepping into a world she had never imagined. A world dark and dangerous, yet offering the possibility of justice. The memory of Liam's smirk, the casual cruelty in his tone, fueled a determination that would not be quenched. Amara vowed she would confront him, she would make him answer for what he had done. But even as she made this silent promise, her heart trembled at the fear of what that confrontation might entail. The stakes were high, and she was alone. And so, as the night deepened, Amara sat in silence, the echoes of betrayal ringing in her ears. The woman who had once trusted so easily was changing, hardened by the pain of deceit. Every heartbeat reminded her that she could no longer return to the innocence of before. Something had shifted irrevocably inside her, a new courage forming in the crucible of heartbreak. She remembered the warmth of his hands, now only a memory, the soft laughter, now a cruel mockery in her mind. She remembered believing in him, and now she knew that belief had been exploited. But even in that darkness, a spark remained, a spark that whispered that she would survive, that she could rise above the humiliation and reclaim her life. Her phone buzzed faintly on the table. She glanced at it with suspicion, her mind already racing, with fear and possibilities. And in that quiet, trembling moment, Amara did not yet know that the events about to unfold would sweep her into a life she had never imagined, a life of danger, of passion, and of a protector who would change everything. But tonight, she was alone with her grief, her heartbreak, and the terrifying realization that the man she had loved could betray so completely. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart, and whispered to herself, "I will not let him destroy me. I will find a way." Her reflection stared back at her, eyes glistening with unshed tears, yet burning with the fire of determination. The world outside was unforgiving, but so was she. The first chapter of her heartbreak had closed, leaving her raw, vulnerable, and yet poised on the brink of something that would change her life forever. The following morning dawned gray and oppressive, a reflection of the storm brewing in Amara's heart. She had barely slept, haunted by memories of Liam's betrayal and the gnawing anxiety that had settled like a stone in her chest. Her mother, Eleanor, was asleep in the small bedroom they shared, her fragile breathing punctuated by occasional coughs that made Amara's stomach twist in helpless worry. Every sound of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, each one a reminder that they were utterly exposed, utterly alone. It was then that the sharp knock came. At first, Amara thought it might be the mail or a neighbor, but the knock was insistent, demanding, almost violent in its precision. Her heart lurched. She crept to the door, her bare feet silent on the cold tiles. Through the peephole, her stomach sank. Liam stood there, a smug smile curling on his lips, the same smile that had once made her heart race with hope. But now it was a predator's grin, cold and calculating. She froze, paralyzed for a moment. Memories of his casual cruelty, the way he had discarded her like she had been nothing, surged through her mind. Amara wanted to retreat, to hide, but fear for her mother overrode everything else. She opened the door cautiously, her voice trembling despite her attempts at composure. "Liam, what are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the modest apartment with an air of entitlement. "I came to collect what's mine," he said, his tone casual, almost light-hearted, but there was a dangerous undercurrent that made Amara's blood run cold. She instinctively moved toward the kitchen, hoping to create distance between him and her mother. Amara Johnson, frail and pale, stirred at the commotion, her eyes widening as she recognized Liam. She tried to rise from her chair, but her weakness betrayed her. "Amara, who is this?" she croaked, her voice shaking. Amara quickly stepped in front of her mother, placing herself between the two. Liam's gaze flicked to Eleanor, and a shadow crossed his face. "Your mother? This little woman? What, do you keep her chained here?" His laugh was sharp, cruel, slicing through the quiet of the apartment. Amara's fists clenched, but she could feel her body trembling with fear. This was not the Liam she had known. This was someone unrecognizable, a man who thrived on intimidation. "Stay back," Amara warned, trying to sound stronger than she felt. Her voice quavered, but there was an edge to it, a desperate attempt at control. "Don't hurt her." "Oh, I'm not here to hurt her." "Not exactly," Liam said, taking a step closer, his hand brushing against a stack of papers on the table, tossing them carelessly aside. "I just want what I'm owed, that's all." His eyes gleamed with a sinister amusement. Amara's mind raced. Her mother's savings, the small inheritance kept in a box under her bed, the gold jewelry that had been passed down through generations, all of it was at risk. Liam's movements were deliberate, threatening. He seized the small safe in the corner, shaking it as though testing its limits, then stuffed its contents into his bag with ease. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached out, but Amara grabbed her mother's frail wrist. "Mom, don't," she whispered, her own heart aching at her mother's helplessness. Liam turned his attention to Amara, his smile sharp, predatory. "And you," he said, "you'll do exactly as I say if you want any of this back. Otherwise," he let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but clear. Amara felt a cold wave of terror sweep over her. This was not just theft. This was leverage, blackmail, a weapon aimed directly at her heart. Her mind raced as Liam leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Meet me one last time, or all of this, all of it, goes public. Every little secret you think I don't know, every private moment. I have everything I need to ruin you, Amara." The words struck like ice, piercing through the fragile defenses she had built since their breakup. Her knees nearly buckled under the weight of the threat. She thought of her mother, sick and trusting. of her own dignity, and felt a surge of panic that clawed at her throat. This was more than betrayal now. This was terror. Amara's hands shook as she faced him, voice barely a whisper. I can't, she started, but he cut her off with a sharp laugh. You can and you will. You have no choice. Liam's eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. I'll be waiting. Don't make me wait too long, or everything changes. With that, he slung the bag over his shoulder and left, the door slamming behind him like a judge's gavel, marking her sentence. Silence descended, suffocating and heavy, broken only by her mother's soft, uneven breaths. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched Amara's, eyes brimming with unspoken fear and sorrow. Amara sank to the floor beside her mother, wrapping her arms around her fragile form, tears streaming down her face, unbidden, hot and fierce, as she fought to steady her shaking body. She could feel the cold, predatory presence of Liam's threat lingering in the apartment, a shadow that refused to dissipate. Her mind raced, searching for a solution, for a way to reclaim some measure of control. There were no easy answers. Police intervention seemed risky. Any wrong move could give Liam the leverage he craved. Amara thought of the videos, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the creeping panic that threatened to paralyze her entirely. Hours passed in tense silence. Eleanor drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, murmuring Amara's name with worry. Amara sat vigilant, listening for every sound outside the door, imagining Liam's return at any moment. Her anger simmered beneath the fear, a slow-burning fire she wasn't ready to extinguish. She would protect her mother, she vowed, no matter the cost. By evening, the reality of the ultimatum weighed on her like a physical burden. She had to face Liam again, had to confront the man who had violated her trust, threatened her mother, and held her life hostage. The thought alone made her stomach churn, fear and desperation mingling in a bitter cocktail. Amara paced the small apartment, her mind spinning with possibilities, strategies, and escape routes. But the truth was undeniable. She had no one to turn to, no ally in sight, and a predator waiting to manipulate her every move. The helplessness threatened to crush her spirit, but somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember of determination refused to die. She looked down at her mother, fragile and trusting, and felt a surge of protective rage. Liam had underestimated her, underestimated the lengths she would go to safeguard the people she loved. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, terrifying and yet strangely clarifying. She had to act, and she had to act quickly. Amara knew that whatever path she chose, it would be dangerous. Fear clawed at her chest, but beneath it, a strange clarity emerged. She would not allow Liam's betrayal to dictate the rest of her life. She would find a way to confront him, to reclaim her dignity and protect her mother. The apartment was silent once more, the storm outside echoing the storm within her heart. Amara sat beside Eleanor, holding her close, feeling the fragile rhythm of her mother's pulse. The threat of Liam loomed over them like a dark cloud, but Amara's resolve was growing. Whatever came next, she would face it. She had no other choice. And in the quiet of that tense evening, she began to form a plan, a desperate, daring plan that would set the course for the events that were about to change her life forever. Fear and despair battled with courage and determination. But one thing was certain. Amara Johnson was not finished fighting. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, phone trembling in her hands, the dim light of the room casting shadows that danced across the walls like silent witnesses to her fear and desperation, her mind spinning with what she had to do next, how she could possibly face Liam again, how she could protect her mother from further harm while still trying to reclaim the remnants of her dignity. And her fingers hovered over the keypad, heart hammering as she dialed the number she believed was Liam's, her pulse accelerating with each passing second, her thoughts a chaotic storm of anxiety and determination. But when the line connected, the voice on the other end was deep, calm, and unfamiliar, commanding attention in a way that made her freeze mid-word, the timbre of it low and dangerous, yet strangely compelling, a voice that immediately demanded both caution and respect. And in that moment, her panic surged as she realized she had misdialed, her stomach twisting in a mixture of fear and disbelief. But the stranger on the line did not hang up, instead speaking softly yet firmly, his words deliberate, probing gently into the tremor in her voice, the raw, tremulous emotion that spilled through her unguarded confession, the panic, the anger, the helplessness as she stumbled over her words, trying to explain Liam's betrayal, the videos, the theft, the blackmail, the terror inflicted on her sick mother, and in every breathless detail, she poured out her anguish, her shame, and her despair, unaware that she had just captured the attention of a man who lived by a code of power, protection, and ruthless justice, a man whose name was Silas Thorne, a name whispered in the underworld with reverence and fear, a man whose instincts recognized weakness and danger immediately, and whose heart, though buried beneath layers of ice and violence, responded to vulnerability with a fierce, almost possessive urge to shield it. And as Amara's voice cracked with emotion, he leaned back in his leather chair, listening with a focus that was both terrifying and comforting, tracing the source of the call, piecing together the coordinates of the threat and the location of the perpetrator, his mind moving faster than hers, calculating, analyzing, preparing, and in a voice that was calm yet commanding, he instructed her to stay where she was, to not make a move, to let him handle the situation, the authority in his tone leaving no room for argument, yet offering a strange, almost inexplicable reassurance that she clung to desperately, a lifeline in a world that had suddenly become hostile and unforgiving. And as the minutes passed, her fear mixed with awe and curiosity, the mysterious intensity of this stranger, both alarming and strangely comforting. His questions precise yet empathetic as he extracted every necessary detail, the sequence of events, the stolen valuables, the thread of the videos, the timeline of Liam's intrusion into their home, and every tremor in her voice, every shudder of fear, he noted and internalized, plotting the path to confrontation with an efficiency that made her heart beat faster for reasons she couldn't yet name, while a small, unfamiliar sense of hope flickered in the pit of her stomach. Fragile but undeniable. The idea that perhaps, just perhaps, there was someone powerful enough, capable enough, and unyielding enough to step into this chaos and protect her and her mother from the predator who had invaded their lives. And as he traced Liam's location with the precision of a man accustomed to tracking and eliminating threats, Amara felt a cautious relief settle over her, a sensation she hadn't experienced in days, mixed with the adrenaline of uncertainty and the suspense of waiting, the tension in her muscles slowly mingling with an unspoken recognition that her life was about to change irrevocably, that the night's events had shifted her existence onto a path that was dark, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable, yet filled with a magnetic sense of protection, a shadowy presence that promised retribution for the betrayal and cruelty she had endured. And as she whispered the details of her mother's condition, the small possessions stolen, and the fear that had nearly paralyzed her, Silas's low growl of understanding on the other end of the line sent a shiver down her spine, his command that she remain calm and await his arrival, his assurance that he was already on the move to intercept Liam, and the subtle undertone of his voice, the quiet power in his words, left her feeling simultaneously vulnerable and inexplicably safe. The chaos outside her apartment momentarily held at bay by a force she could neither see nor fully comprehend. And in that suspended moment, Amara realized that she had not called a savior by intention, but had stumbled into something far greater than she could have imagined. The accidental call that had bridged the gap between despair and protection, between fear and a dangerous, compelling hope. And as the line went silent for a heartbeat while he traced the final coordinates, she could almost hear the anticipation, the meticulous preparation, the looming confrontation with the man who had hurt her so deeply, and somewhere beneath the layers of her panic, her rage, and her anxiety, a flicker of intrigue began to form, a stirring curiosity at the man whose voice had held both the promise of vengeance and the warmth of protection, a man she did not know, yet somehow, in that single, trembling connection, had come to trust with the very truth of her fear. And as the night pressed on outside her window, with the city lights flickering through the blinds like silent witnesses, Amara sat frozen, half in disbelief, half in awe, realizing that the events set into motion by a misdialed number would soon sweep her into a world of danger, power, and an intensity she had never known, the gravity of the situation pressing on her chest, each heartbeat echoing the uncertain rhythm of what was to come. And she knew with a certainty she could not yet articulate that nothing would ever be the same again, that this accidental call had opened the door to a life-altering path, one where fear and safety, chaos and control, vulnerability and strength would collide in ways she could not imagine. And in the trembling silence that followed as she waited for the inevitable confrontation, Amara felt a complex blend of emotions: fear, anticipation, relief, and a strange, electrifying curiosity for the enigmatic man who had entered her life in the most unexpected way, promising protection, promising action, promising a reckoning that would change everything. The city streets pulsed with a restless energy as Silas Thorne's sleek black car glided through the night, the engine a low hum that seemed to resonate with the calculated calm that ran through him like a second heartbeat, every muscle coiled and ready, every sense sharpened to a razor edge. The faint glow of the streetlights reflecting off his sharp jawline and the cold, deliberate precision in his eyes. And as he approached the location of Liam Carter, he felt the familiar surge of controlled rage, the kind that drove him to protect those who could not defend themselves, his mind already anticipating the confrontation, replaying the scenario, weighing the options, and preparing for swift, merciless action, because anyone who preyed on the vulnerable, especially women, was a target he did not forgive. And the moment he saw Liam's smug, careless posture outside the decrepit hotel, a man who thought he was untouchable, Silas's pulse quickened in that quiet, deadly way that signaled impending reckoning. The predator within him awakened, and in the span of seconds, Liam's overconfidence became his downfall. The moment Silas stepped from the shadows like a dark avalanche descending upon him, silent, imposing, impossible to resist, and Liam's smirk faltered as he took in the sight of the man who had intercepted a call meant for someone else, but had decided, with absolute conviction, that the thief, the betrayer, would pay. Every movement Silas made exuded authority, menace, and an unspoken warning, and Liam realized too late that charm and arrogance would not save him, that no legal loophole, no threats, could withstand the force that was Silas Thorne, because he moved with precision, striking with a power that was both calculated and terrifying, forcing Liam to stumble back under the sheer weight of inevitability, the bag of stolen valuables clattering to the pavement as Silas's hand crushed it against the ground, the contents spilling, gold glinting in the dim light like stolen pieces of a life already shattered. And as Liam scrambled, desperate, Silas's voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding, delivering each word like a sentence from a judge who decides fate with a growl. You thought you could terrorize her. You thought no one would intervene. You were wrong. Pain, humiliation, and terror flashed across Liam's face as Silas's fury became tangible, a force that left no room for argument or escape. And every strike, every shove, every precise action was executed, with the brutal elegance of a man who had long ago learned to exact justice on those who preyed on weakness, until Liam crumpled, gasping, broken, and fully aware that his reckoning had arrived, the stolen money and gold reclaimed, each coin and jewel a testament to the power and promise that Silas held for those under his protection. And as the scene settled, Liam left with a warning that lingered like a shadow, a threat embedded in the very air he breathed, knowing he would never again cross the path of someone who wielded protection like a weapon and retribution like a second skin, while Silas, methodical and unhurried, retrieved every piece of Amara's family's valuables, inspecting the gold, the cash, and the sentimental items with a meticulous eye, ensuring nothing was missing, nothing tampered with, everything returned to the way it should have been. His mind already turning toward the next step, toward the woman whose voice had stirred a rare, profound interest in him, and as he stepped into his car once more, the night wrapping around him like a cloak of shadows, he felt the anticipation build, the tension of finally meeting Amara in person. The magnetic pull of curiosity, responsibility, and an unfamiliar, undeniable fascination that laced through his thoughts. And when he arrived at the hotel, the one she had retreated to in fear and desperation, the doors of his vehicle opened silently, and he moved inside with the poise of a predator who knew exactly what he sought, the air thick with a charged expectation, every footstep echoing in the quiet hallway until he reached the door, the moment of truth pressing against his chest, and he knocked. A measured, deliberate sound, each rap of his knuckles a signal of power and intent, and as the door swung open, Amara froze, eyes wide, her gaze meeting a stranger of immense presence, tall, broad, darkly imposing, yet with eyes that betrayed a flicker of understanding, protection, and something raw that made her breath catch. And in that instant, the room seemed to shrink around them, the stolen valuables stacked neatly beside him, the tension of the past hours hanging in the air like a tangible weight, and Silas's voice, low and calm but edged with authority, broke the silence. "I am here for you. Everything he took, everything he threatened you with, it's yours again. You are safe now." And Amara's lips parted in disbelief, a mixture of relief, awe, and the stirrings of a fascination she could not yet name, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch what had been returned, and the realization that the man standing before her, unknown, unanticipated, had altered the course of her night, her fear, her life, filled her chest with an unsteady mix of gratitude, apprehension, and something dangerously compelling. The first moment of a connection that pulsed with intensity, protection, and the unmistakable spark of something neither of them fully understood yet, a silent acknowledgement that their paths had collided for reasons far greater than chance. And as they stood there, the night outside pressing against the windows, shadows playing across their faces, Amara felt the first flicker of trust, the fragile hope that perhaps, in this darkness, there was someone whose power and presence could shield her from the world's cruelty, while Silas, calculating, attentive, aware of the vulnerability and fear in her every movement, recognized a truth that few could see. A woman whose strength was hidden beneath layers of terror and betrayal, a challenge and a fascination, and in that single, charged, and unforgettable moment, the foundations of a story that would be defined by protection, passion, and irrevocable change were laid. The night itself holding its breath as two lives, both marked by fear and betrayal, converged at the threshold of something profound, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The door closed softly behind Silas, and the faint click echoed like a heartbeat in the tense, charged air of the hotel room, leaving Amara standing frozen for a moment, staring at the man who had not only rescued her, but shifted the weight of fear from her shoulders. And in that silence, time seemed to stretch, heavy and electric, as their eyes met, hers wide with disbelief and lingering adrenaline. His calm, dark, commanding, yet oddly gentle, the kind of presence that demanded attention without needing to raise a voice, and as he stepped closer, each measured movement radiating power and control, Amara felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in days, a fragile sense of safety mingled with undeniable attraction, a magnetic pull that was as terrifying as it was irresistible. The stolen valuables now neatly stacked on the table beside him, their mere presence a reminder of what he had done for her, and she found herself breathing a little easier, heart still racing, her pulse echoing in her ears like a drumbeat that matched the rising tension between them, and Silas's gaze softened just slightly as he studied the tremor in her hands, the slight quiver of her lips, the way her eyes darted nervously around the room, and he reached out, hand steady and firm, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, the contact electric, sending shivers down her spine, and the warmth of his touch, combined with the power radiating from him, made her knees weaken, a heady mixture of fear, desire, and relief swirling inside her like a storm. and she found herself speaking, words spilling out in a tremulous whisper, recounting the terror of the past hours, her mother's illness, the betrayal, the blackmail, each word drawing him in deeper, his expression unreadable yet attentive, his silence a pressure that made her pulse quicken, until finally he placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her, anchoring her in a way that made the world outside the room vanish, and the intensity between them thickened, charged with emotion, unspoken longing, and the dangerous thrill of proximity. And as he leaned slightly closer, their faces inches apart, the scent of his cologne, warm and subtly intoxicating, filled her senses, and Amara's breath hitched, the knot of fear and tension in her chest unraveling just enough to allow desire to take root, the collision of relief and attraction forming a heady, dizzying mix that left her both terrified and exhilarated. And he spoke, low, measured, each word deliberate. "You are safe now. Nothing will touch you, I promise." And the firmness in his voice, the unshakable certainty, wrapped around her like a shield, a balm for the raw panic she had carried for so long. And as their eyes locked, the silence became intimate, the room vibrating with the weight of unspoken confessions, mutual recognition, and the primal pull of shared vulnerability. And slowly, tentatively, Amara let herself step closer, drawn by the magnetic gravity of his presence, her hands brushing against his chest, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt, the heat, the power, the danger, and he responded in kind, his hands finding her waist, firm, protective, but gentle enough to coax the tension from her trembling form, and the barrier of fear and hesitation began to dissolve as lips met, softly at first, testing, exploring, a spark igniting that neither of them could ignore. And the kiss deepened, urgent, consuming, as all the terror, adrenaline, and pent-up longing poured into it, a collision of need and emotion that left them both breathless, and Amara's hands tangled in his hair, clinging to him as if holding him would anchor her in a world that had spun so violently out of control. And he guided her back to the bed, careful, commanding, and the air between them sizzled with tension, desire, and a fragile yet undeniable trust that had been forged in the crucible of fear and protection. And as clothes fell away, the heat of their skin meeting, the intimacy deepened, layers of fear, grief, and tension melting into passionate connection, every touch, every caress, a wordless conversation of need, gratitude, and raw emotion. And the world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the rhythm of hearts and breaths, the symphony of passion and relief, the darkness of the hotel room, a cocoon shielding them from reality. And Silas, with deliberate care, ensured every distraction, every potential threat had been neutralized, the stolen valuables recovered, the predator confronted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Amara allowed herself to surrender completely, to feel protected, desired, and alive, the boundaries between them blurring as need and trust intertwined. And in the quiet aftermath, when bodies rested close, skin against skin, hearts still racing, the room bathed in the soft glow of city lights filtering through the blinds, Silas whispered her name, low, possessive, intimate, and Amara felt a shiver of emotion, the magnitude of what had just happened settling over her, a heady mixture of relief, awe, gratitude, and the beginning of an attachment she could not yet name. And as she closed her eyes, heart still thundering, she realized that the accidental call, the terror, the betrayal, and the intervention had led to this singular moment of connection, a night where protection and passion collided, leaving her shaken, exhilarated, and irrevocably drawn to the man who had claimed her safety, her trust, and, unknowingly, the first tendrils of her heart. And as silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the city, Amara pressed closer, her hand resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers, and in that intimate, suspended moment, she understood that her life had shifted irreversibly, and the night of passion had forged a bond that was dangerous, consuming, and impossible to ignore, a connection that promised intensity, protection, and a depth of emotion she had never imagined, and as sleep finally claimed them both in the early hours, tangled in the afterglow of desire, relief, and a nascent trust, the unspoken promise lingered in the air. She would never be alone again, and the world would tremble for anyone who dared threaten her. The days following that night blurred into a surreal haze for Amara, a strange mixture of relief, lingering desire, and a fragile sense of safety woven through every thought. Yet beneath the comfort, a gnawing unease began to stir in the quiet moments, subtle at first, a twisting sensation in her stomach that she tried to ignore, hoping it was just lingering stress, fatigue, or the after effects of the adrenaline that had carried her through the past week. But as she moved about her apartment, tending to her mother and reclaiming her life from the chaos Liam had caused, the feeling grew undeniable, persistent, and impossible to dismiss, pressing against her with quiet insistence until one morning, staring at the faint, almost imperceptible lines on the small test strip, her breath caught, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and fear, making her fingers tremble as she clutched the paper, her mind spinning with the impossible realization that she was pregnant, and not by Silas, but by Liam, the man who had betrayed her so cruelly, whose touch had left scars on her heart, and whose manipulations had nearly destroyed her life. And in that instant, a flood of emotions surged through her: shame, guilt, panic, anger, and a fierce, protective instinct she had never felt so intensely before as she imagined the life growing inside her, innocent and vulnerable, a child tied to a man who did not deserve their existence, and the weight of responsibility pressed down with a suffocating force, threatening to crush her under its enormity, yet mingled with the fear and uncertainty was a fragile flicker of hope, a longing for safety, for love, for someone to stand beside her and protect not just her, but the small life she now carried. And as she sank onto the edge of her bed, clutching her stomach, her tears fell freely, unbidden, the rawness of her despair mingling with the tentative stirrings of anticipation for what her future might hold. And it was then that Silas entered, his presence quiet but commanding, sensing immediately that something was wrong, his sharp eyes reading the tension, the trembling hands, the tears that streaked her cheeks, and without a word, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his, the strength of his grip firm, yet gentle, grounding her, offering a lifeline of calm in the storm raging inside her. And she looked up, voice breaking, barely a whisper. "Silas, I, it's, I'm pregnant. It's his. It's Liam's." And the words hung in the air, heavy with fear, shame, and vulnerability, a confession that carried with it the weight of her heart and the fragile hope she dared to cling to. And for a moment, Silas's expression was unreadable, his jaw tightening, the raw intensity behind his dark eyes flickering with a mix of controlled anger and fierce protectiveness, before he drew her into his arms, holding her close, his lips brushing the top of her head, his embrace a shield against the world and its cruel machinations, and he murmured her name with a low, deliberate intensity. "Amara, listen to me. Nothing matters except your safety and the child's. I will protect both of you. No one will harm you. Not him, not anyone." And the sheer conviction in his voice, the unwavering promise, seeped into her like sunlight through storm clouds, washing away some of the panic and despair that had gripped her, while simultaneously stirring a complex mix of emotions she couldn't yet name: relief, awe, trust, and the first tentative tendrils of love that were no longer just physical, but deeply emotional, tied to the safety, protection, and devotion Silas embodied. And as she clung to him, the sobs that racked her body slowly subsided, replaced by a tremulous, fragile hope, a recognition that the life she carried, though born of betrayal, could now be enveloped in protection, care, and unwavering loyalty, that she did not have to face the threat alone, that someone powerful, honorable, and unyielding had stepped into her chaos and claimed responsibility for shielding her and the child from harm. And in the quiet that followed, as Silas held her against his chest, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her back, she realized that her fear, though justified, had been met with an unexpected, overwhelming force of compassion and commitment, that the shadow of Liam's betrayal no longer loomed as large because Silas had taken up the mantle of protector, vowing to fight for them both with a strength that left no room for doubt. And as she pressed her face into his shoulder, heart pounding, tears slowly drying, a strange, fragile serenity began to settle over her, a sense that, despite the circumstances of conception, the future was no longer dictated by fear and treachery, but could be shaped by trust, love, and the fierce, unwavering dedication of a man who had entered her life unexpectedly but irrevocably. And as Silas whispered again, his voice low and resolute, "You and the child are mine to protect, always." The words wrapped around her like armor, and Amara, trembling but unbroken, allowed herself to believe, to hope, to feel the first spark of peace in weeks, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers Liam or the world could throw at them, she would never face them alone. And that in itself was a revelation, a turning point, a promise that the life growing inside her would be cradled in strength, love, and protection. And for the first time in days, she dared to close her eyes and imagine a future where she and her baby were safe, cherished, and defended by a man whose dark power was matched only by the depth of his commitment. And as the night stretched on, quiet and solemn, Amara rested in Silas's arms, heart still racing, mind still awash with complex emotions, yet with an unshakable certainty that the secret she carried, the life that had begun in betrayal, had found its guardian, its protector, and perhaps, in time, even its love. And in that intimate, charged, and irrevocable moment, the bond between them deepened, layered with trust, responsibility, and a dark, consuming intensity that promised to shape every step of the dangerous, passionate journey ahead, a journey that would see fear, hope, and desire collide in ways Amara had never imagined. And as she drifted into uneasy but comforted sleep, the promise of protection, devotion, and an unbreakable connection held her close, a tether in a world that had so far been cruel, chaotic, and uncertain, yet now felt just a little less so, for she and the child she carried were no longer alone. The fragile peace that had settled over Amara's life after the revelation of her pregnancy was shattered almost as quickly as it had arrived, a creeping sense of danger threading through the city streets like a venomous serpent, whispers of Liam's allies moving in the shadows, men who thrived on intimidation and chaos, eager to reclaim power, wealth, and influence, and Silas, attuned to every vibration of threat, every flicker of motion outside their sanctuary, sensed it immediately, his dark eyes narrowing as he mapped the patterns of surveillance, the subtle cues of danger that only a man like him could discern, and his instincts flared as he positioned Marcus and his team, strategizing with military precision, every contingency accounted for, every angle covered, every potential assailant tracked before they even realized they had been noticed. And the first attempt came swiftly, a late-night confrontation in the narrow alley behind Amara's apartment, shadows twisting under the flickering streetlights, the echo of footsteps heavy with intent and malice, and Silas emerged from the darkness like a Shah, a Tao given life, tall, imposing, every movement a blend of lethal grace and controlled fury. And when the attackers lunged, they met a force that was both brutal and calculated, a storm of power and precision that left them reeling, broken, and fleeing. The night echoing with the sounds of chaos and the unmistakable message that no one dared threaten those under his protection. And Amara, hidden safely within the apartment, felt her pulse race, heart thundering in a mix of fear and awe as she listened to the muffled sounds of violence outside, realizing in a visceral, almost dizzying way just how completely Silas had claimed her safety as his own. And when he returned, dusting his hands, clothes marked with the faintest traces of struggle, the heat and intensity of his presence filled the room like a tangible force, drawing her to him despite the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins, and the way he looked at her, dark eyes smoldering, chest still heaving with controlled exertion, made her pulse spike again, a dangerous, intoxicating mix of admiration, desire, and unspoken longing. And as he stepped closer, every movement deliberate, commanding, yet intimate, the distance between them closing until the air itself seemed charged with the tension of unspoken words and barely restrained passion, and Amara felt the familiar flutter, the dangerous pull of attraction that had already been awakened in their first encounters, now intensified by the shared trauma. The recognition that he would go to any lengths to protect her and the child. A man whose power was absolute and whose commitment was unwavering. And she could see the sharp edge of violence still lingering in him, the side that annihilated threats without hesitation, yet beneath it there was an almost imperceptible tenderness reserved solely for her, a dichotomy that made her knees weak and her mind spin, and Silas, sensing her gaze, let a slow, deliberate hand brush against her cheek, tracing the curve gently. A spark igniting in that contact, the warmth and strength in his touch grounding her even as it stoked the embers of desire that refused to die, and the city around them seemed to hold its breath as another wave of danger approached, a rival faction seeking to test Silas's reach and the boundaries of his protection. Yet he moved with absolute certainty, coordinating from the room with Marcus, orchestrating every strike, every intercept, every maneuver with the cold efficiency of a man accustomed to control, ensuring that Amara remained untouched, safe, and yet acutely aware of the stakes that surrounded them, the peril that only heightened the intimacy and intensity of their connection. And as she watched him command the unfolding chaos with effortless authority, her admiration and fascination deepened, mingling with the desire that had been simmering since their first encounter, her heart responding to both his power and the rare glimpses of vulnerability he allowed in her presence. And when the night finally settled into a tense calm, after every threat had been neutralized and the shadows outside dispersed, Silas returned to her side, close, deliberate, every movement imbued with that dark magnetism that left her breathless and yearning. And in the quiet aftermath, the city lights casting long shadows through the blinds, he lowered his forehead to hers, voice low, almost a growl. "You are mine to protect. No one will touch you. No one will harm you." And the words wrapped around her like armor, a promise both dangerous and intoxicating, and Amara, trembling with a heady mix of fear, relief, and desire, pressed against him, feeling the weight of his body and the certainty of his presence, the emotional bond between them deepening as they clung to one another, hearts racing in unison, pulse sinking with the lingering adrenaline of survival and the simmering heat of attraction. And as the night stretched on, quiet yet electric, each brush of his fingers, each subtle touch, each low murmur reinforced the connection between them, a bond forged in danger, protection, and passion. And Amara realized, in a rush of awareness both terrifying and thrilling, that the man who had entered her life by accident, who had claimed her safety with ruthless precision, had also captured her heart with a depth and intensity she could not deny. And as she rested against him, aware of the darkness that still lingered in the world outside, the shadows of rival threats yet unseen, the pulse of danger still echoing in the city streets, she understood that the path ahead would be fraught with peril. Yet in Silas's arms, with his unwavering promise and the fierce protection he embodied, she felt a heady, intoxicating sense of invincibility, a knowledge that no matter what shadows lurked, no matter what dangers arose, they would face them together, and the tension between them, both romantic and passionate, simmered, a dark, dangerous, and compelling fire that promised to shape every moment, every heartbeat, and every choice to come. And as the first hints of dawn touched the skyline, Amara pressed closer, heart racing, mind alive with the realization that the bond between them had deepened beyond protection into something consuming, thrilling, and irrevocable, a connection forged in violence, desire, and the unyielding intensity of Silas's dark, magnetic presence, a connection that would define the nights, the threats, and the passions still to come. The aftermath of the night's violence still lingered in the air, a residue of adrenaline and tension that clung to every corner of the apartment, and Amara, curled up on the couch, stared into the shadows with a wary, almost haunted gaze, memories of Liam's betrayal twisting in her mind like jagged shards of glass, each one a reminder of how easily trust could be shattered, how quickly love could be weaponized against her. And despite the undeniable safety Silas provided, despite the power and certainty he exuded, a shadow of doubt lingered in her chest, a fragile, trembling thread of fear that, to whispered, she might not be able to fully surrender her heart, that the past could still poison the fragile beginnings of something real. And Silas, observing her from across the room, sensed the storm within her, the hesitation and vulnerability that belied the fiery strength she had shown under pressure, and he approached slowly, deliberately, every step measured to convey patience and understanding rather than dominance. And when he knelt before her, lifting her chin gently with a hand that was both commanding and tender, she flinched only slightly before allowing the warmth of his gaze to penetrate, to reach the parts of her that had been hardened by betrayal. And he spoke softly, low, deliberate, his voice a mixture of authority and compassion. "Amara, I know trust is fragile. I know the past has carved deep scars, but I swear to you, everything I am, everything I do, is for you, for both of you." And the sincerity in his words wrapped around her heart like a protective shield, easing some of the tension, soothing some of the fear, yet not removing it entirely, because trust could not be rebuilt with promises alone. It had to be earned, moment by moment, action by action. And Silas understood that better than anyone, his patience absolute, his devotion unwavering, and over the following days, he proved it in ways both grand and subtle, intercepting minor threats before Amara even knew they existed, taking care of details she had not even considered, ensuring her comfort, anticipating her needs, his attentiveness a living demonstration of his loyalty. And in quiet moments, when the world outside fell silent, he would sit with her, his hand brushing against hers, his presence both grounding and electrifying, sharing stories, listening intently to hers, and the intimacy of conversation, the sharing of fears, hopes, and regrets, began to weave an unbreakable thread. Between them, a delicate yet growing bond forged in protection, understanding, and the raw vulnerability that Amara had long hidden from the world. And as she watched him move, act, care, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble, slowly, reluctantly, opening to the possibility that someone could love her without hidden motives, without betrayal, and that this man, who had entered her life so violently, so unexpectedly, could become the anchor she had long sought. And as nights passed, the physical closeness they shared, the lingering touches, the quiet reassurances whispered in the dark, kindled a fire within her, a dangerous, consuming desire intertwined with trust, a recognition that Silas's protection was not only of her body, but of her spirit, of the fragile hope growing inside her. And in those moments, her heart dared to beat a little faster. Her lips curved in the barest smile, and she found herself leaning into him, resting her head on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a steady, unwavering counterpoint to the chaos she had endured. And Silas, in turn, held her gently, possessively, with a reverence that belied the intensity of his usual nature, speaking only when needed, letting the silence convey understanding, loyalty, and a growing, undeniable love. And though she recoiled at first, her mind haunted by Liam's betrayal, she began to allow herself to believe, to trust, to feel the depth of care in his every act. And as days turned into nights, and nights bled into the quiet intimacy of shared space, Amara realized with a dizzying mix of awe and fear that she was falling, inexorably, irrevocably, deeply in love with a man whose darkness was tempered by devotion, whose strength provided sanctuary for her vulnerabilities, and whose presence transformed the remnants of terror and mistrust into something luminous, tender, and dangerously consuming, and the bond between them solidified, a delicate yet powerful connection built on patience, protection, and mutual recognition of wounds and desires, so that in the quiet stillness of one evening, as Silas held her close, whispering low assurances and soft confessions, Amara felt the last fragments of her resistance dissolve, the fear of betrayal giving way to the intoxicating certainty that for the first time she was truly safe, truly seen, and truly loved. And in that suspended moment, hearts beating in sync, breath mingling, the promise of devotion and the ache of longing fused into a single, overwhelming force, binding them together in a bond forged by danger, passion, and the slow, unrelenting work of trust. And as the city slept beyond the windows, the shadows of past betrayals softened, eclipsed by the light of their emerging love, a love that was as deep, consuming, and irrevocable as the darkness from which it had been born. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across the room, but the calm was only a fragile veneer, a thin sheet over the storm that threatened to return, because Silas knew, as did Amara, that peace was always temporary in a world haunted by betrayal, envy, and the shadowy remnants of past enemies. And when the first message came, subtle yet loaded with menace, a reminder that Liam and his allies had not forgotten, not forgiven, the tension coiled tightly in Silas's chest, his mind already calculating, anticipating, strategizing every possible move, every counter, every strike required to ensure that the woman he loved and the child growing inside her would remain untouchable. And Amara, sensing the shift, pressed close to him, hand over his heart, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm, the unshakable certainty of his presence, a beacon in the storm, a tether to safety in a world that had long been treacherous. And as the day unfolded, the city outside pulsing with indifferent life, Silas moved with calculated authority, confronting old rivals, tracing hidden threats, neutralizing every angle. Lee with ruthless precision, each act a demonstration of his dominance, his commitment, his unyielding code that anyone who dared harm his own would pay in ways that left no room for retaliation. And yet, even amidst the violence and strategy, there were moments stolen for tenderness, brief silences where Amara and he shared a look, a touch, a whisper, and the romantic tension between them solidified into a bond that was both dangerous and intoxicating, a fusion of passion, trust, and the knowledge that they were entwined irrevocably, protector and protected, lover and beloved. Their connection deepened by shared threats and shared victories, and when the final confrontation arrived, it was inevitable, a night thick with shadow and menace, the enemy moving with blind arrogance into the web Silas had so meticulously laid, and he struck with the precision of a man who understood fear, power, and consequence, dismantling every plan, crushing every pretension, leaving those who sought to harm them trembling, broken, and aware that crossing Silas Thorne was a mistake that could never be undone. And Amara, watching from the safe distance he had positioned her, felt awe, relief, and a rush of adrenaline as she realized the full extent of his devotion, the depth of his protective power, and the unwavering commitment that extended not just to her, but to the life she carried. And in the aftermath, when the dust settled and the last shadows retreated, Silas returned to her side, calm, commanding, and impossibly magnetic, his presence filling the room like a living shield, and Amara, still trembling from the night's tension, let herself lean against him, heart still racing, pulse sinking with his, feeling the tangible warmth, the quiet, steady promise of protection, the emotional weight of a man who had chosen to claim both her heart and her life. And as he held her, whispering low assurances of safety, devotion, and unwavering loyalty, she realized that the dark romantic bond between them was no longer tentative or fragile. It was forged in fire, violence, trust, and passion, a connection that could withstand threat, fear, and the lingering shadows of the past. And in that moment, she allowed herself to imagine the future, A vision where Silas was not only her lover, but the guardian of her child, the father figure who would stand unwavering, a powerful and steadfast presence shaping a world that had once been fraught with danger into one of protection, love, and possibility. And as the night drew on, soft with quiet, and the faint hum of city life beyond the windows, they shared whispered confessions, tentative laughter, and gentle touches, each moment layering their bond, solidifying the certainty that they were irrevocably entwined, hearts and bodies, hopes and fears, and in the sanctuary of their home, they discovered the fragile yet unbreakable truth that passion could coexist with protection, danger with love, and darkness with hope. And as Amara rested her head against Silas's chest, fingers tracing the contours of his strong arms, he lowered a kiss to her forehead, his eyes dark with intensity, yet softened with devotion, and she felt the full weight of his promise, the undeniable certainty that neither she nor her child would ever face the world unshielded. And in that intimate, suspended moment, the story of betrayal, fear, and chaos found its resolution, the threats neutralized, the bonds solidified, and the beginning of a new chapter unfolded. One where danger might always lurk beyond the edges, but love, protection, and unyielding devotion provided a foundation unshakable, and as they drifted into sleep together, hearts beating in harmony, bodies intertwined, the night held a quiet, electric promise of suspense, passion, and hope, a reminder that even in the shadows, light and love could emerge, and that for Amara, Silas, and the child she carried, the future was no longer dictated by fear, but by a dark, consuming, and unwavering love that would guide, protect, and endure through every challenge yet to come.